Hi, welcome back. Mindy Mandell here. So today we're going on with the Timaeus, and this is the third video that I'm doing on the Timaeus. And as you can see, the title I've given it is The Motions of the Universe. Now, a bit of a spoiler alert, by the end of the dialogue, Plato is going to tell us that to be healthy, we want to match the motions of our souls to the motions of the universe. And that means, of course, that we have to know what the motions of the universe are. So that's what we're looking at today. Now, I ended the second video, last week's video, with this little teaser here. That's we're going to go on to look at what the soul is made of and in what fashion it was made. And by the way, all of our translations are by Robert Bury. Okay, so that's where we're going from here. But in order to understand what Plato writes on this topic, we have to remember this idea of ousia, which I introduced last week. Ousia is like the essence of each realm, or each of the ideas also. Within each realm, you can also see the same threefold quality of being, power, and intellect. And ousia is the intellectual act of intellect looking to its source and knowing itself. So it's like the intellectual activity that is the mark of essence. So the word essence doesn't sound like there's an activity there, and ousia is a noun, but it implies this intellectual act. And we want to keep this in mind as we look at this quote. Midway between the ousia, which is indivisible and remains always the same, and the ousia, which is transient and divisible in bodies, he blended a third form of ousia, compounded out of the twain, that is to say, out of the same and other. And in like manner he compounded it midway between that one of them which is indivisible and that one which is divisible. And so from this point on, he's going to call these same, other, and being. But we want to keep in mind that all three of these are ousia. And so this is what soul is made out of. And he goes on to say that he took the three of them and he blent them all together into one form, forcing the other into union with the same, in spite of its being naturally difficult to mix. Okay, so we're saying that soul is made of same, other, and ousia. But of course, we know that all three of them really are ousia, which means obviously if you take ousia, ousia, and ousia, and you mix them together, whatever you get is some form of ousia. And then with the aid of ousia, he mixed them, or the aid of this being in the middle. And so keep in mind here that this ousia in the middle here is both an ingredient in the mix, and also it aids in the mixing. So it's doing a double duty here, right? Again, with the aid of this being or ousia, he mixed them and had made of them one out of three. And then straightway he began to distribute the whole thereof into so many portions as was meet. And each portion, each portion was a mixture of the same, of the other, and of being or ousia. And now what he's going to do is go on to distribute them. And there's this long passage. I didn't bother printing the whole thing here or typing it all up. So there's like a portion of the whole and then a double of that and a triple of that. What he's doing here is generating this list of 7 numbers. Now, what's so hot about this list of numbers? Well, they allow us to do this. We can set it up such so that we have the doubles on one side and the cubes on another. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. And then, of course, this allows him to make a bunch of analogies. And remember that Plato loves his analogies because, as we saw before, analogy is built into the very fabric of the unfolding of reality, and also we're seeing within each realm. We can see analogy throughout. And the word analogy, remember, means of the same logos, that it's the same logos. And so there's the same reasoning. It's an intelligibility that goes through all. Analogy, as Plato is pointing out here, is not just a human invention, a tool that we use. We do use it as a tool, but it's not just a human invention. It's a human discovery because it's built into the very fabric of reality. So we can talk about 1:2 is 2:4. 2 is to 4 is 4 is to 8. On the other side, 1 is to 3 is 3 is to 9. 3 is to 9 is 9 is to 27. Another cool thing he can do here is, Plato was very much influenced by the Pythagoreans, and for the Pythagoreans, even numbers are feminine and odd numbers are masculine. And so he also, in the distribution of soul, has some of them as feminine and some as masculine. Now he's going to go on to fill up the intervals in between those numbers. And so between the powers of 2 and the intervals in the series of 3s, he fills them in. So like we take our little list here, these intervals, he wants to fill them in. And to do this, he cut off yet further portions from the original mixture, and he set them in between the portions above rehearsed, so as to place 2 means in each interval. So we're going to look at 2 different kinds of mean analogies, because again, built into the very foundation of this distribution, 2 mean analogies. Here's the first one. A mean which exceeded its extremes and was by them exceeded by the same proportional part or fraction of each of the extremes respectively. Now, if you're not a math person, then you are certainly forgiven for not recognizing what this is. But for the people studying at Plato's Academy, who all, I believe, studied geometry, they would have easily recognized this as the definition that Euclid gave for the harmonic mean. Okay, so here's our 3-term analogy, ABC. If we wanted to find this part in the middle, this would be like our B. So we would look at this as A and C, or A and C, and so on throughout. And we're looking for B. So the formula that we can use to find B would be this one, 2AC over A plus C. So here's an example. Say we want to find this space here between 2 and 4. So 2 is A, 4 is C, and we're looking for B. And so we would just plug 2 and 4 into this equation, and what we get is here. 2 times 4, which is 16, over 2 plus 4, which is 6, which means B would be 2.66 continuous. So that's the harmonic mean. Okay, now there are 2 means, remember, between each number, so here's the second one. The other mean, which exceeded one extreme by the same number or integer, is it was exceeded by its other extreme. So this is just our basic arithmetic mean, the number in the middle. So if A is 2 and C is 4, we can already just see that the answer is going to be 3. It's not always that easy, so we can use this formula. The example, if we were to put it out, would show you it like this. A is 2, C is 4. So that's 6 divided by 2, B is 3. So now this is just the same quote. I just put it all together, and you can see that in this interval between 2 and 4, then there would be 2 different means, 2.66 continuous and 3. And then you would just use those same equations. You can fill in all of the intervals. Okay, so now that he has done this, showing analogy running throughout all of reality, through the distribution of soul and so on, now he's going to go on from here, saying now he splits all this that he has put together into 2 parts lengthwise. And then he laid the twain one against the other, the middle of one to the middle of the other, like a great cross. And he bent either of them into a circle, and he joined them, each to itself and also to the other, at a point opposite to where they had first been laid together. And he compassed them about with the motion that revolves in the same spot continually. I keep harping on this word. I think we all know it by now, that motion that moves in a circle. Let's say it together. Ousia. So that's what he's talking about here, is ousia. It's moving in this motion. This is the motion of the universe. He made the one circle outer and the other is inner. The outer motion he ordained to be the motion of the same, and the inner motion is the motion of the other. Okay, now let's see what he does with them. He gave the sovereignty to the revolution of the same and of the uniform. So this is the higher energy. And you're going to see here throughout that there are lots of parallels to the myth that we saw in The Statesman. I did do some videos on that for those of you who haven't seen it. But if you've seen those videos or you've read that dialogue, you may remember there was that myth of the age of Chronos. And Chronos is that higher energy that moves in a certain direction, whereas in the age of Zeus, that's what we're calling here the circle of the other. It's moving in the opposite direction. They move at different powers. And we're going to see this theme as we go on. Okay, so as for the revolution of the same, this alone he suffered to remain uncloven or undivided, whereas he split the inner revolution into six places into 7 unequal circles, according to each of the intervals of the double and triple intervals, the 3 double and 3 triple. And so these are the numbers that we were using earlier, and then later we're going to see it by the end of the video that he ties these to the celestial bodies, and we'll see what he's going to do with those. And whereas the body of the heaven is visible, the soul is herself invisible and partakes in logos and in harmony, having come into existence by the agency of the best of things intelligible and ever existing as the best of things generated. By the way, notice here that soul is feminine. And that's going to continue throughout. Now the language here, it's a bit verbose, and it can be hard to see what he's saying here, so I want to highlight a few words. Now we say of soul that it is the bridge. There's something of a bridge between the intelligible, which is eternal and never changing, and then our generated world, or the world of becoming, which exists in time and space. Soul is something of a bridge because it has its existence in eternity, but it has its activity in time. And that's what's being expressed here. It comes into existence by the agency of the best of things intelligible. It comes into existence, it has its essence in in the intelligible, or in the realm of the ever existing. But it's ever existing or ever perpetual as the best of things generated. Its activity is within the generated world. Its activity is in time and space. Inasmuch then as she is compounded, blended of the natures of the same and the other in being, these 3 portions, and she is proportionately or by the same logos running throughout, divided and bound together. She revolves back upon herself, right? Soul revolves back on herself. That's that activity of ousia, that intellectual activity that is the essence of soul. And then here's what happens. Whenever she touches anything which has its substance dispersed, or anything which has its substance undivided, she is moved throughout her whole being and announces what the object is identical with and from what it is different, and in what relation, where and how and when it comes about, that each thing exists and is acted upon by others, both in the sphere of the becoming and in that of the ever uniform. Okay, now there's an interesting thing going on here, because you might recognize these sorts of questions that the soul asks, or the things that she answers to herself. What a thing is, how it functions, how it's acted upon, how it acts upon others. These are the very questions that we ask when we are doing Socratic dialectic. And so what I think Plato is suggesting here is something that may seem quite shocking to our modern ways of thinking, but much as analogy is a tool that is not a human invention, but a human but that we're recognizing it as something that truly is part of reality. I think he's saying the same thing about dialectic. So in an academic setting, we can talk about Socratic dialectic, or the Buddhists have Nagarjuna's dialectic, and you can talk about different dialectics. What Plato is saying here is, no, Socratic dialectic is not one area of study or one way of thinking. This is how to reason. I'm sure the Platonists didn't think of themselves as Platonists. They were just reasoning, and they were just using this very natural way of thinking, which is built into the very foundation of all of creation, that we live in an intellectual, intelligible universe, is what they're saying here. And this is built into the very fabric of this whole intelligibility of the universe. So it's a way of thinking that's quite different from our modern sense, but it's something that if we sit with it and look at this, and with all of this metaphysics, actually, I should point this out, that Plato is presenting this, and this is where a lot of his metaphysics is explained. This is probably the most detailed explanation of his metaphysics. It's not something, he's presenting it as mythology, but it doesn't mean we should just believe it because Plato wrote it. Plato wrote it because he sees it as true. And initially, we can read this in a kind of an intellectual way of just, okay, this is what Plato said, blah, 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 point, 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 point. But what we have to do, if you really want to get into this, is to sit with it, turn it inward, and see why Plato wrote this. It's not enough to just say, Plato said it, therefore it's true. That doesn't make sense. That's just a belief system, and that's not what we're doing. What we want to do is take these ideas and look at why he's saying this. And so that's what we have to do here. This is a meditation to really understand what he's saying here. What does it mean to say that dialectic is something that not just humans do, but soul is doing? And by extension, because it's all of the same logos, it means intellect is doing this as well. The gods are doing this. What does that mean? And you have to really sit with it to understand this. Okay, going on with soul, her announcement, being identically true concerning both the other and the same, is born through the self moved without speech or sound. And whenever it is concerned with the sensible and the circle of the other, moving in straight course, it proclaims it to the whole of its soul. Opinions and beliefs arise, which are firm and true. Just point here, I want to pause here for a moment to point out that this circle of the other concerned with the sensible is what in the Statesman was called the age of Zeus. And it has its parallel to the cave allegory of being in the cave, which would be where belief functions. However, of course, the cave is functioning as at the level of humans, at the individual soul. And here we're looking at the soul of the universe. The soul of the universe isn't touched with ignorance. The soul of the universe didn't have a troubled childhood, or have an overbearing parent, or have insecurity issues, or be surrounded by people with false opinions who teach them, the soul, false things. Okay, none of that makes any sense. And so the soul is functioning at the level of belief, at the circle of the other, but it's true belief, right opinion, you might say. And so its beliefs are firm and true, but it's at the proper power of the circle of the other. And again, when it's concerned with the rational and the circle of the same, it's spinning truly, it declares the facts, and then reason and knowledge of necessity result. And that is like the age of Kronos, and has its parallel to the upper world in the cave allegory. Wherefore, as a consequence of this reasoning, want to point out here why he separated the circle of the other into separate parts. And this is a bit of foreshadowing of next week's video. So wherefore, as a consequence of this reasoning and design on the part of God, with a view to the generation of time, the sun and moon and 5 other stars, which bear the appellation of planets, came into existence for the determining and preserving of the numbers of time. So he tied those earlier circles that were broken into 7 in the circle of the other into the planets, and he says the reason for them is they are measurements of time. And so from next week, we're going to take a look at time as a moving image of eternity. And so I do hope that you will join me for that. If you have any questions or comments about anything I did today, please feel free to leave a comment below or send me an email. And if you like what you're seeing, I would appreciate hitting the like button. Also, please think about subscribing. I do put out a new video each week, so you'll get the notification. And also, of course, you can always share with your friends so that you have somebody to talk to about this. So anyway, I do hope that you will join me next week. Thank you very much.